My name is Walter Hensley. I'm 68 years old, a retired federal judge from the Eastern District of Pennsylvania, and I've spent 41 years studying maps, antique maps, mostly. Hand-drawn cartography from the 1700s and 1800s, the kind that shows you not just where a place is, but how the people who lived there understood the world. I have a study lined floor to ceiling with them. My late wife Eleanor used to say, "I loved my maps more than I loved most people." She wasn't entirely wrong. But I want to tell you about the night my younger daughter, who works as a federal prosecutor in Philadelphia, called me at 12:47 in the morning and changed everything. "Dad, listen to me very carefully," she said, and her voice had that flat, cold quality I'd only heard her use in court. "I need you to walk into your study right now. Lock the door behind you. Do not turn on the main lights. Do not call your son. Do not text him. Do you understand me?" "Catherine, what on earth?" "Dad. Yes or no?" "Yes." "Then go. I'll stay on the line." I sat up in bed in the dark. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet you get in a stone colonial outside Doylestown when the heat ticks off and the old beams settle. I padded down the hallway in my slippers, past the framed photographs of my children, past the grandfather clock Eleanor inherited from her mother, and I let myself into the study. I locked the door. I did not turn on the overhead light. "Now what?" I whispered. "Now open the wall safe behind the Mercator print. Tell me what you see." My hands were shaking. I'm not a man who shakes easily. I sat through 3 death penalty trials in my career and I never shook. But there was something in Catherine's voice that had reached down into the oldest part of me, the part that knows when a child is genuinely afraid. I lifted the framed Mercator off its hook. I turned the dial. The safe swung open. It was empty. Not just emptied of the cash and the bonds and the deed to the property. Those were gone, of course. But the original 1762 survey map of the Hensley family land, the one my great-great-grandfather had carried from Bristol when he came over, the one I'd promised would go to the Philadelphia Historical Society after my death, that was gone too. And in its place was a single sheet of paper, a photocopy of my own handwriting, a letter I had never written, dated 3 weeks ago, gifting the entire contents of the safe to my older son. I sat down hard in my reading chair. "Catherine," I said, "how did you know?" "Because his name came across my desk this afternoon, Dad. I'm not supposed to be telling you any of this. I could lose my job for telling you this. But your son and his wife have been running a probate fraud operation for 3 years. We've identified 11 elderly victims. 2 of them are dead, and 2 days ago one of our cooperating witnesses gave us a list of upcoming targets. Your name was on it, Dad, with a date. Tomorrow." I couldn't speak. "Are you there, Dad?" "I'm here. Don't sleep upstairs tonight. Stay in the study. Lock yourself in. I'm sending someone to the house at 6 in the morning. Don't open the door for anyone before then. Not anyone. Not even him. Especially not him. Are you hearing me?" "I'm hearing you." "And Dad?" Her voice cracked, just slightly. For the first time, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry it's him." I sat in that study until the sun came up. I didn't sleep. I looked at the empty safe and I thought about my son Gregory, my firstborn, the boy who used to sit on my lap while I showed him the difference between a Portoland chart and a topographic survey. I thought about the way he'd come back into my life 18 months ago, after 7 years of barely speaking to me, with his new wife Melinda on his arm and a soft, repentant smile that had broken my old, lonely heart wide open. I should back up. I should tell you how a federal judge let himself be played by his own son. Eleanor died 4 years ago, pancreatic cancer. From diagnosis to funeral was 11 weeks. I retired from the bench 6 months later because I couldn't hear arguments without her voice in the back of my head, telling me to be patient, to be fair, to remember that everyone in that courtroom was somebody's child. Without her, I lost my anchor. The house got quiet in a way I couldn't fix. My daughter Catherine called every Sunday from her apartment in Society Hill, but Catherine had her own life, and I would not be the father who made his daughter feel guilty for having one. Gregory had moved to Arizona at 26, after a fight with his mother that I never fully understood. He came to the funeral, stayed 2 days, and disappeared again. Catherine and I didn't hear from him for almost 3 years. Then one afternoon in the spring of last year, my doorbell rang, and there he was on my porch with this woman beside him, the both of them holding a casserole dish. "Dad," Gregory said, "I've been doing the work. I'm in therapy. I want to make things right." His wife Melinda had a gentle voice and a southern accent, and she kept calling me sir. She was 42, a paralegal, she said, working from home for a probate firm in Bucks County. They'd met at a grief support group. Melinda had lost her father the year before. They understood each other, she said, in a way that nobody else could understand. I let them in. Of course I let them in. He was my boy. Within 2 months, they'd moved into the guest wing of the house. The rationale made sense at the time. Melinda's lease was up. Gregory was between consulting jobs. The house had 4 bedrooms I never used, and they offered to take care of the lawn, the gutters, the pool I hadn't drained properly in 2 summers. They installed a Ring camera at the front door for security, then a second one at the back, then one in the kitchen in case Dad falls when we're at the store. We'd want to know. Then one in the upstairs hallway. By August, there were 9 cameras in my home. The only rooms without one were my bedroom, the basement furnace room, and my study. Melinda said she respected my privacy in the rooms where I worked. She said it sweetly. I believed her. Things began to slip in ways I didn't notice until I started counting them backward. Old friends stopped calling. When I called them, they sounded uncomfortable, distant. My oldest friend Bernard, a retired appellate attorney I'd known since law school, finally told me at a coffee shop in October that Gregory had phoned him in July and explained that I was having some cognitive episodes and that any business or personal conversations should probably go through him from now on. Bernard apologized for not telling me sooner. He thought I knew. He thought I'd asked Gregory to handle it. Catherine called me on a Tuesday and told me she'd been to dinner at the house the previous Saturday and found it strange that I kept repeating myself. I told her I hadn't repeated myself. She said, "Dad, you told me the story about Justice Brennan 3 times in one meal." I told her that wasn't what happened. We argued for the first time in our adult lives. She apologized later. I apologized too, but something cold had been planted. Melinda began handling my mail. "Just sorting it for you, sir, so you don't have to deal with the junk." Bills started arriving late. My accountant called twice about missed deadlines that had never been missed before. When I asked Melinda about a particular envelope from my brokerage, she smiled and said, "Oh, I gave that to Gregory. He said he'd take care of it." The brokerage statement stopped arriving altogether the following month. I began to forget things. Or I thought I did. I'd come downstairs for my reading glasses and find them on the kitchen counter when I was certain I'd left them on my nightstand. I'd reach for the bottle of Cabernet I'd bought on Tuesday and find an empty bottle on Friday with no memory of finishing it. My sleeping pills, the mild ones my doctor prescribed after Eleanor died, seemed to be running out faster than they should. The worst night was in early November. I woke up on the kitchen floor at 3 in the morning with no memory of how I'd gotten there. Gregory found me. He was very gentle. He helped me back to bed. The next morning, he sat me down and suggested, kindly, that maybe it was time to talk to a doctor, a specialist, just to be safe. He had the name of a wonderful neurologist in Newtown, Dr. Pemberton. He'd already made an appointment, just in case. I went to that appointment. Dr. Pemberton was a man in his 50s with soft hands and a soft voice and a list of questions that felt like trick questions in a courtroom. What year is it? Who is the president? Spell the word world backward. Draw a clock. He took notes. He took a lot of notes. He told me he wanted me to come back in 3 weeks for further evaluation. I drove home in a fog. I sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes before I could go inside. Here is the moment. I need you to understand this moment, because everything that came after grew out of it. I had walked into that house 1,000 times. I knew every floorboard. I knew which step on the staircase creaked. I knew that the side door from the garage was the quietest entry. And as I came in through that side door without announcing myself, I heard Melinda's voice from the kitchen, talking on speakerphone, and what I heard was this. "Pemberton's going to come back with mild cognitive decline. Probably early stage. That's all we need. With that on file, we can petition for emergency conservatorship in February. The map alone is appraised at $87,000. The house is worth $1.4. The Hensley estate is the biggest score we've had." A man on the line laughed. He said, "Your husband finally pulled his weight." Melinda said, "Don't even start." The old man almost remembered where he put the brokerage password last week. "We've been switching out his pills for 3 months, and he still keeps notes I don't know about. There's something he's hiding in that study." I stood in the mudroom with my coat still on. I did not move. I did not breathe. I waited until she ended the call. Then I went back out the side door, walked around to the front, made a great show of stomping my boots on the mat, and I called out, "I'm home!" in the warmest voice I could manage. I had spent 41 years on the bench learning when to show my hand and when to hold it. I held it now. That night, I did 3 things. I called my old law clerk, a woman named Diane, who had become a private investigator after she left Chambers, and I asked her to come to my house through the backwoods at 6 the next morning. I drove to a CVS 20 minutes away and bought a small voice-activated recorder, the kind they sell for college students. And I called Catherine. I did not tell her everything. I told her only that I needed to update my will, and could she recommend a lawyer who was not connected to anyone in our family circle. She gave me the name of a woman in Center City named Frances Okonkwo. I made an appointment for the following week, paid in cash, and I did not tell anyone in my house where I was going. The voice-activated recorder lived inside a hollow brass globe on the 3rd shelf of my study. The globe was a reproduction behind from 1492, a piece of decorative junk I'd inherited from a colleague. Nobody ever touched it. Nobody noticed when I walked through the kitchen carrying it for polishing. For 8 weeks I gathered. I gathered quietly. I gathered patiently. I am by trade a man who builds cases. I learned that Melinda was not a paralegal. She had been disbarred from the Florida bar in 2019 for embezzling from a client trust account. I learned that her real name was not Melinda Hensley. I learned that Gregory had not been between consulting jobs. Gregory had been the subject of 2 civil suits in Arizona for elder financial abuse, both settled out of court. I learned that the man on the speakerphone was Melinda's brother, an attorney in New Jersey named Russell Vance, who had a history of filing fraudulent guardianship petitions on behalf of clients who were, in fact, his sister's marks. I learned that there were 9 other families. 2 of the elderly victims had died within a year of being placed under conservatorship. One of them, a retired piano teacher in Bryn Mawr, had been moved into a memory care facility while she still had her full faculties and had stopped eating 6 months later. Her estate had been liquidated and the proceeds had vanished into a chain of LLCs that traced back to Russell Vance's law firm. Diane brought me copies of everything. We met at a diner in Lansdale on the days I claimed I was going to the chiropractor. I built a binder. The binder lived inside the false bottom of a map drawer in my study, beneath a stack of 19th century railroad surveys nobody but me would ever bother to lift. I went back to Dr. Pemberton for my second appointment. I did the tests. I drew the clock. I spelled the word backward. He told me, with grave concern, that the results suggested mild cognitive impairment, and that he was prepared to write a letter recommending a full guardianship evaluation. I thanked him. I drove home. I parked in the driveway. I went inside and ate dinner with my son and his wife, and I smiled at their kindness, and I asked Melinda about her day, and I praised the chicken. Then I went down to the study and I called Catherine, and for the first time in 8 weeks I told her everything. She was silent for a very long moment. Then she said, "Dad, I need you to understand. I cannot be your lawyer in this. I cannot be involved in the criminal investigation either because of the conflict, but I can make a phone call to a colleague I trust, and I will." That call was made on a Tuesday. The call to me, the one I've already told you about, the one at 12:47 in the morning, came 13 days later. What Catherine could not tell me on the phone, what she would only tell me afterward, was that Russell Vance had been arrested that afternoon in a separate matter. They'd flipped him in under 6 hours. He'd given them the entire roster, including the operation scheduled for my home the next morning at 9, in which Gregory and Melinda would meet a notary that Russell had bribed to witness the voluntary transfer of the deed to my house and the contents of my brokerage accounts to Gregory, while I was conveniently medicated into a stupor with the same crushed sleeping pills they'd been microdosing into my evening tea for 4 months. The bureau came at 6. They came in 2 unmarked vehicles. They brought Diane with them, because Diane had been working as a confidential informant for them for the last 3 weeks without telling me, and I cannot describe to you how I felt about that, except to say that I was both furious and grateful in equal measure. The way you can only be with people you love. We staged the scene the way they wanted it. I was in bed, asleep. The tea was on my nightstand. A female agent was hidden in my bedroom closet. 2 more were in the basement. Diane was in my study. Catherine was not there. Catherine was at her desk in the federal building 30 miles south, sitting on her hands, because she could not be in that house. At 8:52, I heard Melinda's voice coming up the stairs. Walter? Honey? It's time to get up. We have that appointment, remember? I groaned and rolled over and pretended to be exactly the man she had spent 4 months building. The notary was already in the kitchen. Russell Vance was on the phone via speaker walking them through the language. Gregory was holding the pen. Melinda was holding the deed. The agents came up through the basement and in through the back garden simultaneously. I will tell you what I remember most clearly. I remember the sound of my son's voice when he saw the badge. He said, "Dad, Dad, what is this?" He said it like he was 8 years old, and he had broken something he hadn't meant to break. He said it like he believed, in some small chamber of his heart, that his father could still fix it. I came down the stairs in my robe. I stood in the doorway of my own kitchen. I looked at my son. I said, "I heard you, Gregory, in November. I heard everything." He started to cry. Melinda did not. Melinda's face did something I will remember until I die. It went smooth, and it went still, and she looked at me with such bright, clean hatred that I understood, for the first time, what my son had married. Gregory said, "Dad, please, please. Whatever you think you heard," I said, "I have 8 weeks of recordings. I have bank records. I have your wife's real name. I have the testimony of 9 other families. And I have a daughter who has spent the last 2 weeks not sleeping because she had to choose between her brother and her father, and she chose her father, and you are the one who put that choice in her mouth." He sat down on the kitchen floor. He put his head in his hands. He said, "I didn't want to." She said it was the only way. I said, "You are 46 years old, Gregory. You don't get to say she made you. Not anymore." The agents took them both out of my house in handcuffs. Melinda walked. Gregory had to be helped to his feet. When the door closed, I sat down at my own kitchen table, and I wept for the first time since Eleanor's funeral. I wept for almost an hour. Then I got up, washed my face, and called my daughter. I said, "Catherine, come over, bring whatever you need, stay tonight." She came. She brought a duffel bag. She slept in the room she'd grown up in, and in the morning she made me eggs, and she did not ask me how I was, because she knew better than to ask a man like me a question like that on a morning like that. The criminal case moved quickly. Russell Vance had given the prosecutors everything in exchange for a sentence reduction, and the audio I had recorded made the conspiracy charge airtight. Gregory took a plea. 12 years federal, with restitution to all the victims totaling $4.3 million. He'd be 63 when he was eligible for release, if he was released at all. Melinda fought it and lost worse. 18 years. The judge, a colleague of mine I had never sat beside, but had known for 30 years, looked at her at sentencing and said, "You preyed upon the loneliness of grieving people. There is no version of this where you walk out of a courtroom in less than 15 years." The civil suit against the assets they'd already moved offshore took longer. Francis Okonkwo, my new attorney, was patient and ferocious and worth every dollar. We recovered the deed to my house. We recovered the brokerage accounts. We never recovered the 1,762 survey map. Melinda had sold it to a private collector in Geneva for $30,000, well below its appraised value, and the buyer had subsequently sold it to a museum in a country with which the United States has limited extradition treaties for cultural property. The map is gone. Some things are gone. Gregory wrote me a letter from federal custody 3 months in. 8 pages handwritten on yellow legal paper. He apologized for everything. He said he understood if I never wrote back. He said he had been a coward and a thief and a son who did not deserve the father he'd been given. He said he hoped, someday, when he was older and I was older still, we might find a way back to one another. I read the letter 3 times. I put it in a manila folder. I did not write back. I am not a man who lies, and I did not yet know whether forgiveness was something I could offer him without lying. Catherine asked me, 6 months later, if I had decided. I told her the truth. I told her that I loved my son, and that loving him did not obligate me to trust him, and that trust was a thing he had spent 4 months systematically dismantling, and it would take him longer than 4 months to put it back together, if he could put it back together at all. I told her that the door was not closed forever, but the door was not open, and the door would not open on his timeline. It would open on mine, if it opened. She nodded. She didn't push. She has her mother's wisdom about when to leave a thing alone. I sold the house in the spring. Too many ghosts, too many cameras I had finally taken down with my own hands, one by one, and dropped into a trash bag on the curb. I bought a smaller place on the other side of the county, a stone cottage with 2 bedrooms and a detached carriage house. I converted into a proper map room with proper humidity control and a proper safe, the kind that doesn't sit behind a Mercator print. I started teaching again, once a week, at the local community college, a continuing education course on the history of American cartography. My students are mostly retirees. We meet on Wednesday evenings. We drink bad coffee out of styrofoam cups, and we look at copies of beautiful old maps, and we talk about how every map is somebody's argument about what matters. Most of my students have grandchildren. Some of them have grown children they no longer speak to. Once, after class, a woman in her 70s stayed behind to ask me a question about a Lewis and Clark survey, and instead asked me, very quietly, "Were you the judge whose son was just convicted?" I read about it. I have a son too. I told her I was. I told her that the only thing I had learned from any of it was that you can love someone with your whole heart and still tell them no. That love does not require you to hand over the keys. That loving your child is not the same as letting your child have everything they want, and the difference between those two things might be the most important boundary a parent ever draws. She cried. I let her. After a few minutes, she thanked me. She left. I drove home through the dark. I let myself into my cottage. I put the kettle on. I went into my map room and I unrolled the only original 18th century chart I have left, a 1,789 coastal survey of the Delaware Bay drawn by a man whose name nobody remembers. I sat with it for a long time, the way I used to sit with my wife at the end of the day when neither of us needed to speak. The grandfather clock Eleanor had inherited from her mother chimed 11 from the front room. I am 68 years old. I have lost a wife I will love until the day I die. I have lost a son to his own choices, and I do not yet know whether I will find him again, and I have made peace with not knowing. I have a daughter who picked up the phone at 12:47 in the morning and saved my life, and who calls me every Sunday, and who is coming for Thanksgiving with a man she would like me to meet. I have a small house I own outright. I have a map room that nobody but me has the key to. I have students who listen to me on Wednesday nights. I have my health, for now, and I have my mind, which they tried very hard to take from me, and which I kept. People ask me sometimes, the few who know the story, whether I think of it as revenge. My son in prison, my daughter-in-law in prison, the whole operation dismantled and the other families made whole. I tell them no. I tell them revenge is a small word for a small feeling, and what happened in my kitchen that morning was not small. It was the consequence of a life lived honestly, meeting the consequence of a life lived dishonestly, in the open, in the daylight, with witnesses. That is not revenge. That is the way the world is supposed to work, on the rare and lucky days when it works at all. And on the days it doesn't, you do what I did. You listen. You wait. You build the case. You trust the daughter who tells you to lock the door at 12:47 in the morning. You let the people who love you save you, even when the person they have to save you from is the person you raised. I wind the grandfather clock every Sunday morning. I sit with my coffee. I look at the maps on my walls, every one of them somebody's careful argument about where the edges of the known world end. And I keep going, because the alternative is to let the people who tried to erase you decide what your life was for, and I am not going to give them that. Not now, not ever.